statement on Ukraine, I call the Foreign Secretary David Lammy.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will make a statement on Ukraine. In January 2022, I visited the Wall of Remembrance of the Fallen in Kyiv with my right honourable friend, the Defence Secretary. Seeing the faces of all of those who had lost their lives since 2014 brought home the human cost of Kremlin imperialism and Ukrainian determination to stand up to it. And indeed, some weeks later, just as British and American intelligence services had warned, we awoke to news of Putin's full-scale invasion launched to shatter the sovereign state of Ukraine. Today we mark 3 years of Ukrainian courage in resisting. That brutal, illegal, unprovoked invasion. I have witnessed their fortitude firsthand on 3 visits to Kyiv over the last year. Their defiant blitz spirit as Russian missiles and drones rain down night after night after night. So on this grim anniversary, amid all the talk about talks, we must not forget that Russia's barbaric war goes on. That Ukrainian people are suffering, and beyond Europe, the conflict is piling pressure on the world's poorest too. Mr. Speaker, this debate takes place against the backdrop of intense diplomatic efforts, responding, of course, to President Trump's call to bring this war to a swift end. At the G20 in South Africa last week, I listened to Sergei Lavrov. Once again, he shamelessly played the victim, rehashing the same old lies. And I will say to this House what I said in response. If Russia is serious about a lasting peace that respects Ukraine's sovereignty, Ukraine's independence, and the United Nations Charter, guarantees Ukraine's security against future aggression, rejects imperialism, then Britain will listen. No one wants this more than Ukraine. And at the Munich Security Conference, I underlined that Ukraine must be at the heart of any talks about Ukraine's future. And I said the West must learn from our history. Vladimir Putin and his war is no historical aberration. He draws on a Tsarist tradition, the imperialism and authoritarianism of Peter the Great or Nicholas I, and a Soviet tradition. He is, after all, a KGB agent who operates by deception. It was an American diplomat, Mr. Speaker, George Kennan, who warned in 1947 of a deep continuity in Kremlin thinking. It's referred to as the long telegram. He argued that they would only respond to strength, and that was the basis for the policy of containment, a part of which Britain contributed tens of thousands of troops to the British Army of the Rhine. It was this strength, not paper promises, which deterred Moscow from further advances west. Today, let us look at the Kremlin's recent record. The Helsinki Final Act of 1975, betrayed. The Budapest Memorandum of 1994, betrayed. The NATO-Russian Founding Act of 1997, betrayed. The Minsk Agreement of 2014 and 2015, betrayed. This is foreign policy by lies. And we must respond by being true to ourselves and provide the support Ukraine needs to stay strong. Because that is what is needed to secure a lasting peace and to shape our collective security so that Putin never invades again. The UK has a unique role in helping to shape and make this happen. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, was in Paris last week talking to our European allies about how we step up support for Ukraine, accelerate work on security guarantees, and take more responsibility for the security of our continent. And in Munich, I spoke to Vice President Vance and Secretary of State Rubio. While in Brussels, my right honourable friend, the Defence Secretary, chaired the Ukraine's Defence Contact Group, where US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth confirmed that, like us, the US wants to see a sovereign, prosperous Ukraine. Europe must shoulder its share of the burden. With the United States and their unique capabilities, we can deter Putin from attacking Ukraine again, from escalating hybrid Russian attacks in Europe into some form of direct confrontation. So this week, the Prime Minister and I will be travelling to Washington, D.C. to meet President Trump. Ukraine needs friends and allies on both sides of the Atlantic working together to achieve peace through strength. Both President Trump and President Zelensky have spoken of their desire to achieve this. And the Prime Minister will reaffirm to Zelensky in a call today that this is Britain's goal as well. This must include European countries investing more in our own defence and capabilities. Already, the UK has stepped up and sped up military assistance. We've committed $3 billion in military aid a year, every year, for as long as it takes. And over the next 2 years, we will provide an additional $2.26 billion earmarked for military spending via our share of the $50 billion G7 loan backed by frozen Russian assets. In addition, as the Prime Minister has made clear, we know our Kremlin history, which is why we're ready to contribute to future security guarantees for Ukraine in the context of a US backstop, including by putting our own troops on the ground if necessary. That would not be an easy decision. Anyone in this House who has taken responsibility for the lives of British servicemen and women can attest to that. Yet I know the whole House recognises that Ukraine's security is our security. The UK also continues to set the pace on ratcheting up the economic pressure on the Kremlin. Together with our international partners, we have already denied Russia access to $400 billion. Their war economy is increasingly unsustainable. Inflation is 9.9% and rising. That's just the official figure, of course. Interest rates are running at 21%. And this year, Russia will spend almost 41% of its budget on defence and security. Today, Mr. Speaker, we're announcing our biggest package of sanctions since the early days of the war. Over 100 targets, including 40 oil tankers, our largest set of ship specifications in a single sanctions package yet, as well as third country enablers pouring money into Putin's war chest, and new legislation imposing additional trade sanctions on Russia too. This will deny Russia access to world-leading expertise needed to maintain its war. And today, the UK is also solidifying our historic 100-year partnership with Ukraine. Signed by the Prime Minister and President Zelensky in Kyiv in January. In February, I saw for myself how much this partnership means to Ukraine and how much potential there is for our collective growth and security. Together, we lay that agreement in Parliament for scrutiny, and I look forward to it entering into force when that process is complete, a clear sign of our confidence in Ukraine's future. Mr. Speaker, this is a critical moment. I want to acknowledge how colleagues have stood united these past 3 years, honourable members from all parties, as well as noble lords in the other place, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, several predecessors as Foreign Secretary. I'm proud of this unity. It's a tribute to our country. Proud of this country's unwavering support to our Ukrainian friends. Proud that the United Kingdom is rightly taking on the responsibility of bringing our allies together. That is how we confront a foreign policy based on lies. How we secure Ukraine's future, secure Europe's future, and face down a Kremlin dictator once again. Slava Ukraini. I commend this statement to the House.
So the Foreign Secretary, Priti Patel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to begin by thanking the Foreign Secretary for his statement and the advance sight of it as well. Because, Mr. Speaker, the House stands united with Ukraine on this absolutely grim milestone. 3 years on from Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, we all think of the innocent lives caught up in this terrible conflict. The civilians mercilessly killed in towns such as Bucha and Irpin and in the east. The young Ukrainian children forcibly deported to Russia. The families of brave troops who have not returned alive from the front line. And all of those, Mr. Speaker, with life-changing injuries. And those who've lost their homes and possessions. When the war started, the UK led the global efforts to back Ukraine and to rightly punish Putin. From training tens of thousands of Ukrainian recruits on British soil, to donating Challenger 2 battle tanks and Storm Shadow missiles, to being part of an unprecedented international sanctions response that has deprived Putin's regime of $400 billion, to being one of the first countries to provide Ukraine with that multi-billion, multi-year pound funding pledge in military aid. The UK has led the way for Ukraine. And our support has made a material difference to Ukraine's ability to hold the line. Never forget that the cost of this war to Putin has been catastrophic. Russia's Black Sea Fleet has been pummeled, and it is likely by the summer that Russia will have incurred 1 million casualties, with Putin desperately turning to North Korea for troops and to Iran for weapons. Meanwhile, as we've heard, Russia's economy is in dire straits. There have been uprisings against Putin's regime, and the central pitch of his leadership, that he was the great restorer of Russia's stability, lies in ruins. Mr. Speaker, the British public continue to rightly stand resolutely with Ukraine, and they expect us as politicians across this House to do so. And I just want to thank again the many thousands who have so generously opened up their homes to Ukrainians fleeing the war, including through the Homes to Ukraine scheme. Genuinely, they've showed the best of our country, the best of Britain. Mr. Speaker, although there has been much debate, and we've heard already, about the course of the conflict in recent days, this war continues to rage. And I urge the government, rightly so, to continue giving Ukraine everything they need, all the hardware they need, and all the diplomatic support to strengthen their hand. And I'm sure the Foreign Secretary with the Prime Minister will do that in Washington this week. There must be no let-up whatsoever. We welcome the announcement today on new sanctions. And can the Foreign Secretary confirm that there are no plans to lift sanctions in the future? And if he discusses the use particularly of sanctions when he goes to Washington this week, and the role of the United States on this sanctions policy, can the Foreign Secretary give us an assurance and update us on whether we should expect to see any new resources and support, either in terms of military aid or humanitarian support in the coming weeks? Now is the time for Britain to lead, as the Foreign Secretary has said, as we did from day one, and ensure that Ukraine is in the best possible position to decide its own future. We should be very clear. It remains ultimately for Ukraine, as a proud and sovereign nation that has sacrificed so much to defend itself, to decide its own future, and that's peace through strength. We want this terrible war to be brought to an end, and like President Zelensky, we want a lasting, reliable and just peace. But the Euro-Atlantic community must continue to be intensely robust in the face of Putin's aggression, because a lesson of the last 20 years is clear, that he only comes back for more. We must ensure that this illegal invasion like this can never happen again. We need a stronger deterrence. We recognise the Prime Minister has commented on the options and the security guarantees in recent days, and I can assure the House that His Majesty's opposition stands ready to engage with this government at every single level. We must lead our NATO allies in Europe, both in the long term. Collective defence and planning must be coordinated to back Ukraine in their fight for freedom. There is already, as the government will know, a fully funded plan to get to 2.5% of GDP on defence by 2030 from the previous government. And I would strongly urge this government to at least look at a minimum plan to match that commitment, and we will work with them in terms of how that is delivered, to set a new benchmark for other NATO countries to follow, and to fire up everything that we can on defence production. The US also knows that the UK has an influential role in NATO, and I'm sure the Foreign Secretary will be discussing that this week. I would also just like to say that in light of this target for 2.5%, it's not a goal in itself, it's an important step on that journey to increase the strength of our defence spending. And given the threats our nation faces, I would urge the government, and in fact the Foreign Secretary, because this is within his purview and his department, to review and repurpose some of the 0.5% currently spent on ODA to further our national defence and safety and security. Finally, the moral and economic case for mobilising sovereign assets off Russia to support Ukraine is very clear. The Foreign Secretary has spoken about this already. I would urge the government to do more. Mr. Speaker, we stand united as one house. Slava Ukraine.